Hello and welcome to Week 2 in Rhetorical Theory. This is Dr. Harris, and I'm creating this short video to kind of introduce us to the concepts for Week 2 and help us to get started in jumping from contemporary rhetoric back roughly 2,500 years to classical Greece, and to explain a little bit about why we're doing that in this order. So in week 1, you read Bitzer and Vats and had a really lively discussion about the differences in those two readings. And basically it comes down to the concept of where rhetoric originates. Does rhetoric originate in a situation, or does rhetoric originate with a scholar who necessarily or unnecessarily uses that rhetoric to create a situation? We'll see those same kinds of tensions play out throughout rhetorical history. So with that in mind, we're going to jump back to a group of ancient rhetoricians called the Sophists. So you have a few readings this week I want to talk about very quickly in your schedule. This first reading you don't have to summarize. It just provides you a really quick overview by a rhetorician named George Duke of ancient Greek sophists, so it kind of gives you a context for the rest of your readings. And then your first actual summarized reading will be in A Synoptic History of Classical Rhetoric. It's chapter 2. You can go back and look at chapter 1. It gives you the pre-sophistic rhetoricians. We're not going to worry too much about them, but it just provides some context for those of you who are really interested in rhetorical history. But rhetorical consciousness is where we're going to start. Ancient Greece was the kind of first culture that created a political system that actually allowed for the practice of rhetoric. And so what you see happening are this group called the Sophists that kind of rise to that challenge to help people understand how rhetoric can be used to defend themselves mostly, but also in the Senate. Then you'll read John Polakos's Toward a Sophistic Definition of Rhetoric, and this is a reading from 1983, so we're kind of coming back forward again a little bit, and he explains why it's important to study the sophists, which was not always a focus of rhetorical study throughout our history. And then you're going to read Cheryl Glenn's Sex, Lies, and Manuscript, Reconfiguring Aspasia in the History of Rhetoric, and she focuses on looking at a woman who was generally considered to be a person who influenced a great number of rhetoricians and philosophers, even though we have no intact existent writing of hers. So those are our readings this week. And what I really wanted to spend some time on in this video, you'll see on the website here, is this Nan Johnson quote. Nan Johnson is a scholar of 19th century rhetoric. And this quote can kind of help you organize your thinking about a really a kind of complex period in the history of rhetoric, but also see these threads that kind of weave through all of the readings that we talk about when we talk about rhetoric this term. And she says, the most conspicuous characteristic in the history of rhetoric has been its responsiveness to the ever-changing nature of certain intellectual and cultural imperatives. And she lists 4, and I'm going to read these to you so you can kind of get a start on seeing what those are. Number 1 is the governing epistemological assumptions between the nature of thought, language, and communication. So in other words, where thought and communication overlap. Does communication create thought? Do we have a thought and then it works itself into communication? Bitzer and Vats are two ends of that spectrum when you think about the relationship of thought and communication. The dominant philosophical views of human nature and of effective response to discourse that deals with pathos and emotion. There are groups of rhetoricians and scholars in ancient Greece who feel that logos should be the focus. We should have logical sound arguments and emotion should not be a part of that. The Sophists did not necessarily agree. So what are the philosophical views of how the human brain operates? Should we use effective discourse? Should we cater to emotion? Should we not do that? Number 3, the conventional and institutional perceptions of appropriate modes of formal communication. You'll see this happening more in this shift from Greek to Roman rhetoric that we'll experience here in 2 weeks. But what are the ways that we communicate formally and appropriately? So Bitzer's concept of that fitting response plays into this one. Vats's concept of how the rhetor's ethically inclined to have to respond to a situation plays into this concept as well. And then finally, the perceived role of the study and practice of rhetoric in the maintenance of social and political order. I won't say anything else about that in terms of the Greeks. I'll let you look at that and figure that out on your own. But it plays a pretty significant part in the readings this week. Lastly, I just want to touch on the week 2 summary reading summary question. So after you read those readings, what I would like you to do is take one of those 4 intellectual or cultural imperatives that Nan Johnson listed and argue for it as being the most influential in the prominence of the sophists and Aspasia. So which one of these 4 elements do you think most played into the way that rhetoric was studied in classical Greece? The discussion board should be up for week 2, so we can talk about these readings with our classmates before you have to do that reading summary. You did a great job in week 1 of doing that. This week, we'll kind of cut out the introductory material and just use that discussion board to focus on discussing the readings, helping each other get a foothold in this time period that was extremely important to the study of rhetoric that we'll look at the rest of this term. If you have any questions, as always, email me, and I look forward to reading your discussion board posts and your reading summaries and working with you in week 2. Bye-bye.